All right, so we're going to begin Chapter 4, which specifically is congruent triangles, but we start with a section on congruent figures. When we do that, we start with our goals. Our goals include recognizing congruent figures, and their corresponding parts. All right, which makes sense. If two figures are going to be congruent, then so are their parts going to be. Basically, if polygons are congruent, so are their sides and angles. All right, so are their sides and angles. The sides are made up of segments. The angles are obviously their angles. We're going to call them vertices as well. To determine if they are indeed congruent, we compare their corresponding parts. Get used to that word. It's going to show up a lot. All right. All right. And then we add a definition. Congruent polygons. And I'm going to use a symbol to make sure it fits. Congruent polygons. All right. Have congruent corresponding parts. They're matching sides and angles. When naming congruent polygons, you must list corresponding vertices in the same order. Okay, you must list corresponding vertices in the same order. So when naming them, you must list. Okay, so now I'm looking at this. All right. So basically, they would give you information. They would give you that, which tells you they're congruent. They might give you numbers, which tells you it's congruent. All right. Whatever they do, they'll give you enough information to say they're congruent. But at the same time, angles have to be congruent. All right. So that could be 40, 40. All right. They could tell you those angles are congruent. They could tell you that's 100 and that's 100. And they could give you the double arc marks. All right. So they either got to give you enough information or we'll realize we're going to deduct it using, obviously, deductive reasoning. All right, so if I name it A, B, C, D, the one on the left, there's my congruent symbol. I would have to do the same order over here, F, G, H, K. That way we know A and F match up. Well, A is 40 and F is 40. We know that BC matches up with GH. BC is 6, GH is 6. Okay? So that's why it's important. It may not seem like a big deal, but it's going to be more important as we go along. Okay. Working backwards, giving congruent figures. Giving congruent figures. We simply match up letters in the same corresponding position to identify congruent sides and vertices. And as I mentioned before, sides are the segments that meet to form the polygon, and vertices are the shared endpoints, which become the angles. All right, so then they give us an example. MNOP is congruent to QRST. Identify all pairs of congruent sides and angles. So, congruent corresponding parts. Angles and sides. All you have to do is match up letters. I don't even need the diagram. Okay, I don't even need the diagram to do this. All right, because letter M matches up with letter Q. So I know angle M is congruent to angle Q. Letter N, so angle N matches up, it's the second letter with angle R. And that's all we do. Angle Q, oh, that's an O, sorry. Angle O is congruent to angle R. Oh, I'm sorry, S. And then finally, the last letter is angle P, congruent to angle T. The sides, MN, congruent to QR or RQ. NO or ON, no, is congruent to RS. OP is congruent to ST. Again, they're segments. And then finally, don't forget the last and the first. MP is congruent to QT. So in other words, remember that the first letter and the last letter always make a segment. And that's all you're doing. You're matching up letters, so you don't even need the diagram in order to do that problem. All right? Now, when naming congruent parts, however, keep in mind the following. Number one, don't forget the last letters and first letters with naming congruent segments, all right? So the number of congruent parts is always equal to the number of letters. Angles can be named with 3 letters as well. Just make sure the vertices match up from the congruency statement and the other 2 letters make up consecutive vertices. So in other words, if you had in that previous one angle MPQ, P is the middle letter. If you look at it, P matched up with T, so you would have to give, it's MPO, so it's MP. Let me start over. It'll be a lot easier. Let me get the diagram out. So in other words, this is what I mean by that. If we named it with 3 letters, so let's say angle PMN, okay? M matches up with Q. All right, just make sure the other 2 letters are connected to Q. So it could be R and T in either of those orders. All right, you just couldn't use S. So make sure you just have them in the right order when you do that. All right, so 2 things to talk about when proving angles figures are congruent. Why is it